All right. Chapter module 11. Golly, we've been working our way around the horn, and we're hitting third base, and then we'll head for home on Wednesday. So I've been reading a lot about strategy execution. And the research tells us that for every 10 strategies created, only 6 really see the light of day. Other 4 get lost in translation. They're overcomplicated. People resist and refuse to execute, and a host of other reasons. But execution is important. It's in some ways it's not as fun as strategy formulation, but implementation is incredibly important. Just literally read an article, and it interviewed a couple of top executives from big companies, and they said they'd rather have excellent execution of a kind of a okay strategy than terrible execution of a brilliant strategy. So it's to get results, to move in a direction, is an important component that we can't lose sight of. So here are the strategies. We've done our research. We've picked our alternatives. We're going to grow geographically, or like Walmart, we're going to vertically integrate to open up our own dairy plant. Or like Hulu, we're going to develop a cooperative relationship by forming a equity strategic alliance. Or now in the case of Facebook, we're going to refresh the brand. We're going to come up with a new name. We're going to reposition the business. Whatever you choose, whatever 3, 4, or 5 bets that you make, you've got to work on execution. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll get into it again on Wednesday. So let me start by confessing one of my terrible execution blunders. As you well know, Ukrops was the 3rd supermarket in the United States to get sushi. Company in Seattle was 2, Philly is 2. Seattle was 1, Philly was 2, we were 3. So we had a huge success with that. If you remember, we built those sushi bars, cost about $16,000 to build. We had an alliance with a company called AFC that actually made the sushi in the store. We didn't feel we had the capability of doing it. We did not charge them rent. We said, give us 20% of your revenue. We got up to $10,000 a week, which meant that they were giving us every week checks for $2,000. Remember, it cost $16,000 to build, very cheap in construction standards, and we had it paid off in 8 weeks. Everything after that was a return on invested capital. It was a fairly easy execution, and it was amazing. And we made hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years because of it. Well, I got a bit cocky. I was in Ohio. Went to my friends in Dorothy Lane Market in Akron, Ohio. I tasted this really yummy fish called Lake Victoria perch, which you see right there. And for those of you who like to fish, you know that typically perch are very small. My first perch I ever caught when I was like 7, I mean, it was like 4 inches long, something like that. But when I tasted Lake Victoria perch in Dayton, Ohio, I think I might have said Akron, but it's Dayton, Ohio. I love seafood. It was fantastic. It was white, fleshy, just so good. Tastes a lot like mahi-mahi. If you like mahi-mahi, that's the saltwater fish, but that's what the taste was. So I come back to Richmond. Let's get us some Lake Victoria perch. Cost me over $100,000 to source it and get it here. Came into Baltimore, brought it down to Richmond. Pretty much my seafood managers were trying to figure out what the heck is Kelly doing? He's crazy. Nobody's going to want to buy Lake Victoria perch. I didn't do really any research. I didn't test it out in a store. I just said, bring those fish in. And so the team resisted, my seafood team resisted, our customers resisted. It was $100,000 blunder, simply because I demonstrated hubris, didn't really think it through. I just was feeling cocky because sushi was so successful. And I assumed that success would carry over to Lake Victoria perch, but not so fast, young man. That's what I found out. So it didn't succeed. And so what we know when we talk about typical employees and typical organizations around the United States is only 37% of them have a clear understanding of what the organization is trying to achieve and why. So you think about that for a second. Think about a football team, 11 players on each side of the ball, offense, defense. And, we only got 4 people, let's say, 4 players on offense, 4 players on defense, knowing what the heck's going on. Are they going to be able to be successful? There's no way. Even if you have the best quarterback, you have the best wide receiver, you have the best tailback. I mean, if the other players don't know what's happening, it ain't going to happen. And then even worse, and that's just people understand what kind of offense are we running? I mean, what are we doing? What's our strategy for the game? And then even worse, only 20% said they had a clear line of sight between their tasks and the team and the organization's goals. Well, what does line of sight mean? Line of sight means that you and your individual job understand the role that you play in achieving the strategy's success, no matter what your job is. And so, if you're changing over from a technology standpoint, and if you're using a certain ERP and you've gone to the street and you've purchased a new ERP and you're trying to implement it, number one, you got to make sure that what you purchase, the system that you bought is a good one for your company. And then you got to work on the execution. Does everybody in the organization understand what their role is? And it gets back to just the clarity of what you're trying to do. The research will also tell us that 75% of us need to understand the rationale, why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. So implementation is not easy. You don't want to have to rely on coercion, because coercion doesn't have any long-term sustainability. I mean, people will do something when you're not when you're looking, when you turn your head, they're going to revert back to what they were doing before. So implementation is important. Just ask Target. We know Target has done a fantastic job implementing their private label program. My worry for Target is that they're feeling the same thing I did with sushi. They're feeling so good that hubris might start to set in, and they start overusing their private label. Maybe they can execute it, and we can see the fact that Trader Joe's and Aldi, at least have, in Aldi's case, probably 20% of their SKUs are national brands. But you got to be careful that hubris doesn't set in. And so what Target did, even though they're located in 27 different countries like Chile, Mexico, and Guatemala, they failed in Canada, which is weird because Target's headquarters is in Minneapolis, which borders Canada. So even the best companies can mess implementation up. And what we have talked about repeatedly is the fact that Walmart wanted to go online for their retailing, but there was huge resistance. They didn't get it right. They tried and failed. They left Bentonville, went to Silicon Valley, still failed. And then they finally said, all right, the only way we're going to get this right is we're going to do it through an acquisition. And so they bought Jet.com. They installed the Jet.com CEO as the CEO of the online retailing portion. And little by little, they were able to figure out how to make it happen. So eventually Walmart succeeded, but it took them a long time, and they fell behind Amazon when doing so. So they have been working really hard to catch up to Amazon. And the reality is they're probably not going to be able to catch up to them for quite some time. But I've been incredibly impressed with what Walmart's been doing. And so even the best, biggest, most resourceful companies struggle with execution. And Target is a great example of that. Opened 133 stores in Canada, closed 133 stores in Canada. So if you find this topic of interest to you, and I would tell you that if you had any aspiration to be a general manager or a CEO or a director of an operation, you better know how to manage change. It is almost a sub-specialty of organization behavior. And Contro came up with an 8-step change framework, and his first step there is to create a sense of urgency. You gotta start talking about the future, and you essentially have to say, look, what we've done is great up to this point. Walmart team, people, you should be proud of our brick and mortar stores. They have been a juggernaut. We have put huge amount of companies out of business. We have operated a $500 billion business. But we have to understand that the world is changing and the world is migrating more and more to online retailing. And if we don't do this, we will lose. So you create a sense of urgency. 2, then you find a group of senior leaders and influencers who become your what we call guiding coalition, the truth tellers. And sometimes that's 12, 15, depending upon the intensity, the size of the project or the initiative or the strategy. Then you're really clear. You're trying to paint a vision of where you're trying to go. So if we go back to Walmart with the dairy, Walmart had a vision to build a dairy, and they wanted it to be the nation's largest, most effective, most cost efficient dairy. And they painted a picture. And then number 4, they enlisted an army of workers. Now it says volunteer. This is really not a volunteer. It's workers who are actually going to be the ones that are going to make it happen. So these are the real estate folks that we're going to find the location. This is the construction folks that we're going to go out and hire the general contractors, including potentially Joshua's company, and bringing generators to the work site. Then you're going to empower people. I mean, you say, go do your job, make it happen, help us achieve that vision. You're going to look for quick wins. Sometimes these projects will take 2, 3, 4 years, and it's hard not to generate some celebration and quick wins along the way. And then once you start you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, you sustain change, you accelerate it. And then once you see the change taking shape and starting to come alive, you want to embed it into the organization. So, if you think about any change, whether it's the dairy at Walmart or the Target stores in Canada, something broke down along the way. It could have been at step 1, and this is urgency. This is all about creating readiness to get people thinking about what they're going to need to do. And people are remember what we talked about, paradigms as a result of cognitive dissonance. And so you have to encourage their heads, give them the rationale for it, but encourage their hearts as well. So this is the 8-step model that we go through. This one slide is now, I'm going to shift gears to psychology 101. This is Vroom's expectancy theory. This is what gets us up every day in bed or not, or what keeps us in bed, in the morning. And Vroom's expectancy theory is all about effort. So if I am an employee of Walmart and I'm asked to participate in building this amazing dairy, how much effort will I exert in doing so? And what Vroom's expectancy theory says is the amount of effort I expend ultimately has a relationship to my performance and the outcomes that will come from that. And then ultimately, do I find the outcomes desirable? So do I get an incentive bonus if I hit my timetable to get the facility, the dairy built on time? So if I'm the construction people, and I'm working with all the general contractors, et cetera, and our original goal is to get it done by August of 2018. Am I going to be able to hit my goal? And if I hit my goal, I get a $50,000 bonus. And how important is that bonus to me? Well, for most of us, I don't think we're all going to pass up on a $50,000 bonus. But generally, we're more complex than just that. I mean, sure, there are people who only are driven by the monetary side, or what we call the extrinsic financial component to it. But a lot of people are also driven by the intrinsic, the satisfaction of doing a job well done. And so this goes back to, we've got the marathon coming up this week here in Richmond. The New York Marathon was this past Sunday, or yesterday, I should say, in New York City. Why do people run marathons? And so why would they create that as a vision for themselves? And then how much effort are they willing to put into it? What are they going to expect from a performance standpoint? So maybe it's just somebody that says, I just want to freaking finish the thing. Somebody else might say, I want to finish it in under 4 hours. And then, ultimately, are those satisfactory to you? And so we play these head games. Remember, we have these conversations with ourselves. And ultimately, when we think about the effort that we put into at school, how much effort did you put into the paper? What are you hoping to get in terms of an outcome, a grade? How important is, getting a C, B, or A for you? So this all ties back to the psychology of change management. And we can't just say, here, we're going to open a dairy, freaking go do it. We've got to navigate it. We got to be able to manage it to make sure that we're doing the right things. To do what? To get a return on invested capital. I did not get a return on invested capital on that Lake Victoria perch. Didn't get it. It was 100,000. I got a lot more stories like that. If you ever want to go out for a cup of coffee, to tell you, my failures. But we had a lot of success as well. And so your strategy is a bet, and you put your money down, and you want to get a return on invested capital on that bet. That's the bottom line. And so you're being able to navigate how well you're occurring. And so when you think about Mary Barra at General Motors, who says that General Electric or General Motors will be fully electric by 2035, and think about it, it's 14 years from now. And then Volvo comes out and says, oh yeah, we're going to be fully electric by 2030, which is what they've done. And all of a sudden we start to see all the variables that need to come out to that right here. So what's the sense of urgency for Mary Barra around it? Who is working on this from a coalition standpoint? Go to their website, and they've got very clear vision for what they want to do. Who's working on it? All the different people working on it. her job is to try to help remove the barriers. Well, guess what's a big barrier right now? A big barrier is the charging stations, and what we see with the infrastructure bill that just got through the Senate, is that a lot of those dollars are geared towards charging stations, building charging stations. So right now, if I'm a contractor, if I'm an electrical contractor, and I've been trying to figure out how to build my business, right now I am going to start putting together my own capability to start building those suckers, because there's going to be billions of dollars out there available for charging stations to be built. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you'll be a subcontractor to General Motors? Does that mean you'll be a subcontractor to Dominion Power, Dominion Energy, or do you just go out and do it yourself? So this piece of legislation, we go back to Pastel, the political stuff coming out is going to be a great opportunity for organizations that are in that electrical world. So closely related then to this is the whole notion about how you're designing your organization. So this is about creating and implementing and monitoring and modifying the structure, the processes and procedures to align, and with emphasis on alignment with the brand, the business strategies, and the values of the organization. So, I mean, when you think about whether you love football or not, or an NFL fan or not, I mean, what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did last year was pretty amazing. I mean, I'm not a huge Tampa Bay fan, but they went in and they were able to bring in a resource that ended up becoming a source of competitive advantage, Tom Brady. He brought in Rob Gronkowski, and he also brought in other players. And they were able to, it took them a while. There was a lot of criticism early. Why? Because they're learning the process, they're learning the procedures, they're trying to figure out an identity of who they wanted to be. But then they started getting hot very early. And of course, we know now, what the outcome of that was. Every starter, I believe, from last year's team decided to stay with Tampa Bay rather than going somewhere else. And so as a result of that, they were seen by many to be the preseason favorites this year. I know they've lost one game. I think they've lost two. We'll see how they come out of their most recent loss. They lost to New Orleans last week. I don't think they played yesterday, or might be playing tonight. I don't know, or tomorrow. But it's about bringing it all together, guys, so you can execute on your vision. And for Tampa Bay, the vision was to win the Super Bowl. So right back here, remember I said brand position. So whatever you do from a strategy standpoint, it's got to be in alignment. Whether you're a broad differentiation brand, or a focused differentiated brand, or a low cost leader, or low cost focused brand, or a blue ocean brand, whatever you're thinking about from a strategy standpoint has to make sense. It has to be on brand. So whatever strategy you create has to be on brand, else your employees aren't really going to buy into it. So if you're a low-cost strategy brand or low-cost leader, and I'll even say low-cost focus, you're going to focus on these 6 elements around being highly efficient with your systems and supply chain, leveraging data management, leveraging economies of scale wherever you can to reduce production costs, and keeping your systems incredibly efficient, looking at your schedule, delivery schedule, and trying to pick when you can low-cost transportation, having a highly productive sales force, and then efficient and proper installations in order to reduce the frequency and severity of cost. So on the left side, low-cost players are gonna be focusing on these things as they execute on their strategies. And then on the differentiation side, you're going to focus on your raw materials, You're looking at your manufacturing process to give you the opportunity for customization and make sure that everything's high quality. You're going to have great responsiveness, and rapid and timely deliveries. Interestingly, on the gray piece, you're going to extend credit buying arrangements, and based upon personal relationships that you have with your buyers and suppliers, and then a lot of training that's going to go into place too. So this is called alignment. Your systems have to line up with what you're trying to do at a strategy level. It's got to be aligned for how you're trying to position your brand. So then you guys start worrying about how are we going to control what's going on. I mean, we're in the implementation phase. How are we going to know whether things are working out right? So if you're Lowe's paper, that's why I asked you to put in a key KPI. Just give me one KPI for each one of your 3 strategies. That's strategic control. And so whatever your strategy is, you got to come up with some type of a way to measure whether it's working or not, ultimately to know what, if you're going to get a return on invested capital. So on the bottom, you see the financial stuff. That's day-to-day financial controls that you're going to use. So for those of you in accounting and finance, you're going to understand that, this is going to be in your P&L. This is really important to us in my old world at UCops, and it even is today, in terms for my little consulting firm. It's huge, even for the School of Business and all the rest of the schools and the university. So this could be revenue, this could be margin, this could be net income, this could be labor costs, it could be supply costs, the key measure for labor is labor as a percent of sales, supplies as a percent of sales. And so you come up with an objective criteria, and then you get historical data on it, and then you're able to measure yourself. And then on the top are what we call your brand controls. So if you're positioning yourself as a high differentiator, and one of the ways that you're going to differentiate yourself is through superior customer service, then you better get a measure on how well you're delivering on that. I've got a client who every year for the past 8 years, we have created a customer experience metric for them. And we see how well they are delivering on their brand promise of service excellence. And so if you're Jimmy John's and you're freaky fast, that's a brand promise that, how fast are we? If you're a Panera, or let's go back to Chick-fil-A, what we know is Chick-fil-A is focused on fast and friendly service, and that's a brand attribute, a brand promise. So they will measure from the point of entry into a drive-through to the point where you pick up your food. They're going to target that interaction, that experience, to be no more than 6 minutes, 5-6 minutes. So if you're taking 7 minutes or 8 minutes to get your way through, Chick-fil-A for that one interaction is not living their brand. So companies have to be cognizant of what the brand controls are. And this is going to know, are you living your brand or not? People listen to what you say, but they will believe what you do. Are you living it? That's brand controls. Financial controls are the day-to-day stuff that every company in America has to put some level of control over. And then the strategic controls are really geared towards what you're trying to do at a strategy level. So let's go back to the Walmart dairy. So a strategic control may actually be, again, how, if we're saying that we want to be open by August 2018, it's going to be a 2-year process to build the plant. You got to have different milestones along the way, and you're going to keep track of that. In the construction industry, there's a term called FADE, and FADE is can be a financial control of construction, but if you're moving a project, if you're Walmart, you want to try to eliminate as much FADE as you can. because you very well could be charged for that by your general contractor. And what I mean by that is if you're Walmart halfway through, you say, wait a second, we want to change something. And the general contractor will say, wait. We estimated the cost of this based upon this blueprint. Now you want to change it. So that's going to have ramifications. And so you want to have these strategic controls in place as well. So controls, measurement is a really important component of that. So when we think about structure, yes. So what the heck does that mean? Well, it's really about the formal relationships and procedures and controls and authority and decision making that guides the day-to-day heartbeat of an organization, really. So every one of you who is working right now has a boss. And then more than likely that boss has a boss. And then depending upon how big the organization is, that boss has a boss. When I came out of my graduate degree at 25 and I went to work for Philip Morris, my direct boss was Mike. His boss was Dan. His boss was Barry. And his boss was a gentleman in New York, Fred, I should say. So you had Mike, you had Dan, you had Barry, you had Fred, and then you had the CEO. That was my structure. And so you get used to it. It's a lot of levels there, but I knew every one of my bosses except the president. In my 8 years at Philip Morris, I never met the president once during that whole period of time. So the big sentence in there says structure should always follow strategy, not the other way around. And sometimes companies will say things are messed up, so let's change the structure. And that's looking at it backwards. If things aren't working right, let's change the strategy, and then figuring out after we change the strategy, what are we doing to mess up the implementation of the strategy itself. And yes, maybe your structure is messed up, but you can't make the assumption that the structure is messed up before you take a deep breath, look back, and figure out what your strategy is. So when we look at some examples of structures, no matter if you're innovative, your customer service, marketing, whatever, we start with the classic hierarchical centralized command and control structure. So it's centralized structure. And this is where you have a corporate office that makes all the decisions and monitors all the activities, while the operating division serves as an extension of the corporate office's authority. And so this is the way things were from when we moved into the industrial age of sorts. And if you were working in a manufacturing facility and you work for a company and there were 5 manufacturing facilities, everybody's pretty much going to follow the drumbeat of their corporate office. So centralized structure, it's about control, it's about predictability, it's about trying to eliminate redundancy where you can, and that's the way the world worked for many years. Then we started getting a little maybe more flexible of sorts, and we moved to decentralized. Some organizations, not all, moved to decentralized structure. And basically what this is saying is that the separate businesses or profit centers are going to make decisions in the best interest of their customers and business. And so if you're an organization like Berkshire Hathaway, the way the organization is going to be structured is the fact that Dairy Queen and the senior leaders for Dairy Queen are going to follow their own path, as well as the senior leaders for Fruit of the Loom and for Benjamin Moore Paints and NetJets and Geico, all the different divisions of Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett all he wants them to do is ring, 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 ding, 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 send me the money. And so companies like Berkshire Hathaway operate an incredibly decentralized structure. Now, with that said, they're going to have certain expectations for return on invested capital, because Warren Buffett, in essence, is a bank. And if Dairy Queen says we're growing geographically, in which they are, and they just opened a new unit 5 minutes from where I sit, each one of those units is, I don't have a clue, guys. Let me just say $4 million, maybe something like that to build, maybe more, but something like that. Then he's expecting to get a return. They better find the right geographic location, spend the money, open it up, staff it, and then that puppy's going to have to get to a break even pretty soon, I'm sure within a year. And then after that, start making money on top of that. So, but the reality is, if you remember about geographical growth, there's a lot of overlap here. Some brands, remember the Nike sneakers, and then the high luxury handbags, they're gonna go out in a standardized way, while most companies will be transnational. And so the reality is there'll be certain decisions that will be consistent against all between all among all operating units. So, and that's the brand. So if you're a Wegmans expects a certain amount of consistency and without compromise across all of their 100+ stores. But Richmond, Virginia is very different than operating a store in Rochester, New York, or in Boston, Massachusetts. So Wegmans will allow the general manager some discretion in terms of product mix in the store. Even for us at Ucrops, my Ashland store sold more dog food than any other supermarket in our chain. And a lot of folks obviously have dogs in Ashland at that time. And so we would allocate more space for dog food in our Ashland store. And so we even did it. Just the difference between Ashland and Carytown, there was big differences in terms of what people like to eat. At Carytown, we had a lot more people who liked lamb than we did at our Mechanicsville store or wherever. So there's always going to be a certain level of decentralized structure, but and there's always going to be a little bit of overlap between the two. The third structure is matrix, and now we're getting a little bit more complicated. The matrix now is that you got two bosses, and you're going, what? What do you mean I got two bosses? Let's say you're in human resources, and again, you're working for Walmart, and you're building the dairy, and you get chosen to run the human resource division for the dairy at Walmart. and so what's going to happen is that dairy general manager is going to be your day-to-day boss, but yet you've got to report in and have some relationship with a corporate HR team from Walmart. So you've got these issues around straight line versus dotted line, and every organization is going to be the same, but the general manager in the dairy in Indiana for Walmart is really going to be providing direction to the HR person in terms of what they need to do every day. But again, the HR person's got to follow the rules. They got to follow the law, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which we'll talk about on Wednesday, and other things. So they got to live in two worlds. They got to make their boss, dairy manager, dairy plant manager, happy, and they got to make their HR person happy. And so if there are two different styles, you're every day you're dealing with two different styles that you got to be able to navigate. And sometimes that can be really tough. And so, but that becomes a reality of how a lot of strategy gets done. And then that last one, holacracy. is where you ain't even got a boss. I mean, there's another term called self-directed work teams. So when General Motors came up with the Saturn brand, maybe you probably don't even remember that, they operated this way. It was going to be self-managed work teams. It was the craziest darn thing you ever saw. No supervisors, no managers. It'd be like you guys running this class together, and no Professor Kelly here to navigate or to. I don't even think I supervise, but whatever my role I'm playing here with you all be doing it yourselves. And so that type of structure requires a certain type of individual to be able to navigate and be successful in that way. Zappos went in this direction a few years back. They gave everybody who worked at Zappos the opportunity to check out. Maybe 15-20% of their workforce said, I ain't going to do this. I'd like having a boss. They got a check to leave. And I haven't heard lately since their CEO died what's been going on with that. So these are 4 options, let's call them, in terms of how companies get built and who's going to be reporting to who. And so if you're thinking about your brand and your brand is highly focused towards customer service and you're geographically dispersed, you want the local organization responding to customer needs. So you want to have decentralization, but you also want to live the brand. And so there's got to be an element of centralization there too. So you're going to operate in a hybrid way. So these two together, and most organizations are going to operate in a hybrid way. A couple of characteristics to think about. So we think about stability. We need stability. We like coming to work. We like knowing who our boss is. we like knowing where decisions are made, and so predictability can be really good. But when the competition changes, when the external world changes, and too much stability keeps you or serves as a barrier for you to respond to what the external environment is going to throw at you, then that can be a bad thing. And so what happened with COVID is there had to be a lot of structural flexibility in terms of who is going to be working on COVID. And for a lot of organizations, the bulk force of this was falling down on the shoulders of human resource folks. So structural flexibility is really important. And structural flexibility is essentially saying, and I'll give you an example a little bit later, but where for right now, a VP has one job that's been reporting them for a while, and now the world changes in risk management, which reported to that person now is going to be moved to another area because of safety threats, et cetera. So I'll give you an example a little bit later. And then some more ways to define it in terms of how organizations grow. So you have a simple structure, which is essentially you do a startup, you're the owner, you're the CEO, you're the manager, and all the decisions are going to be made by you. You're monitoring all the activities. Maybe you got 2 or 3 or 4 people working with you. Then you start to grow, and as you grow, somebody gets to officially be the CEO, and then you start creating manager jobs. So whether it's in accounting, marketing, HR, R&D, engineering, depending upon what you do. If you're production, if you're producing a product, then you got to have some type of production manager, and they actually might outsource the manufacturing, but somebody's still got to be in charge of manufacturing, even though they have limited staff to help them out there. And then once you get really big, and you start to grow, you're going to have multi-divisional structure. So I have students all the time say, gosh, I have an opportunity to go to work for a startup, which is a simple structure. What do you think, Professor? Versus to go to work for a pretty large system. And there's often trade-offs. you go to work for a larger structure, a multi-divisional structure, you're pretty much going to be in a very specific role. You're going to have more predictability, usually. The pay's probably going to be a little bit better. But the great thing about a simple structure is you're going to get to learn a lot of things that you didn't get to learn in college. And so, if right now, if you're a HR manager, major, and you go to work for a simple structure to help staff it up, you're probably also going to learn about marketing. If you're a supply chain major, you go to work in a simple structure, you're probably actually learn operations, maybe even some other elements as well. So you're able to pick up additional skills in a simple structure that might take you a long period of time in more of a functional or multi-divisional structure. So it all depends on the culture, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of pure skill building, I'm all for simple structures. So let's show you some examples. And so this was my old world, and I've spoken about it, so I wanted to give you a sense of what it looked like. So the orange box is my boss, Bobby Ukrop. I was in the VP of operations job. We had a CFO, his name was David, classic CFO. He also had information systems underneath him. And then I talked about structural flexibility. When the world changed and cloud came into being, Bobby made the decision that he needed a separate director of technology or information systems. So that represented about 30% of David's job. So we moved that job up as a direct report to the CEO. And at that point in time, I had taken over some new responsibilities. So risk management actually moved up under David. So again, structural flexibility. Risk management had been under me for many years, and I liked it. But David would be great at it, and he's a better negotiator than me. So we moved that up underneath him. If you remember, Ucrop's was positioned with 3 promises: superior customer service, fresh food innovation, and social impact. We gave 10% of our pre-tax profits back to charitable organizations. Fresh food innovation, we had to have somebody that was in charge of it. So we were the only supermarket in the country for many years who actually had a vice president for fresh food R&D, Jackie Lake. So for those of you who've ever tasted a Ucrop product, like rainbow cookies, like chicken breast salad, like White House rolls, on and on and on and on, breakfast pizza, brownie bites, it came out of Jackie's R&D team. So when we decided to differentiate by our perimeter, meaning that produce, deli, bakery, seafood, meat, etc., was going to have prepared foods, value item items, Jackie came in and played a key role in making that happen. Then we had Scott Ukrop as the VP of Sales and Marketing. They were in charge of television commercials and our weekly ads and the Ukrop's 10K and the Christmas parade, etc. And then when we decided to vertically integrate, Jackie over here was producing the recipes, and then Gary, who had been a director of manufacturing for Nestle, came over and helped us out here. Gary also had a dotted line into me because we had to sell our foods in all the retail stores that you see in blue. So this was our structure, and it was fluid, and this is the way it was pretty much so before I left. I did have one other direct reports that I didn't put on there, but yeah, and so we changed over time, and we kept it pretty real based upon what was going on in the external world. So when you think of big structures and how brands are formed, you typically have your neighborhood structure, your regional, brand. So a neighborhood would be somebody like Shields Market down in the Fan. I don't know who's ever gone there. I was there for the first time on Friday. Went down to see my daughter who lives in the Fan, and we walked to Shields Market. And little neighborhood market. Then you have regional. That's what Ucrop's was, regional from Ashland, or I should say Fredericksburg, to Short Pump, to Williamsburg, to Petersburg after I left. They then went down to Roanoke. And then super regional is like a Wegmans, a Publix, a Food Lion, a national that's like a Walmart, a Whole Foods, a Kroger, and then a global is going to be a brand like a Walmart and of course Target, even though they didn't do well in Canada, they are a fairly global brand. So the structure and controls need to match the size and complexity of the brand. So as I finish up, what I want to do is give you some examples of structures and which you can look forward to. So this is a simple one. I mean, the reality is the Walmart structure is really complex, but if you were to crystallize it, you're going to have a president, CEO of Walmart USA, which is going to be the Walmart stores, president, CEO of Walmart International, president, CEO of Sam's Club. This was Roz Brewer, if you remember, we did our little thing on Roz, and then she went to Starbucks, and now she's at Walgreens Boots Alliance. And then this was the gentleman who came in, who was acquired Jet.com. He came in and ran this job. He has now since left. I'm not sure who's running this side of the business. So there are, where does the manufacturing fall in? I don't know. Could actually be under here. That would make sense. But part of me feels that maybe manufacturing will eventually grow to be a direct report to to the Walmart stores or somewhere else. I'm not sure. So kind of interesting in how that works. This is an older structure. Howard Schultz is no longer there, but just gives you a sense of what to aspire to. So when I came out with an HR degree, master's degree in HR, I had just thought that I wanted to be a senior HR executive for a company. And that's what I was first at UCROPS, the VP of HR. And then after 4 years, they gave me the operating role. You have your chief technology officer. Sometimes that's called chief information systems officers. Sometimes there's a new chief data officer for some companies. They're keeping them separate. You have the CFO, global chief marketing officer. Here's what's interesting. If you're digging on what we're talking about, that you have some companies that actually will have a chief strategy officer. If you really love what we have been doing this semester, you more than likely need to get an MBA and then work for a consulting firm. And so like a McKinsey or an Accenture or KPMG in a strategy role, and then work your way up in that strategy role, maybe even to a partner for a consulting firm or a managing director for a consulting firm. And then you jump over and get hired by a Starbucks or a McDonald's or whoever. Then you have your regional people. This is the Americas, which would include, typically it's going to include Canada, United States, and Mexico. They have a very specific, they've done fantastic in China. So they have Belinda Wong. I don't know if any of these people are in their jobs right now, but she was running that. And then you had the Europe, Middle East, and Africa person. So a little bit of a hybrid structure in the way they do it. And so, they operated in a pretty this is pretty lean, actually, not too complicated in terms of a structure. Here's Aldi. And so you have the office of the president, which will be headquartered. I think their headquarters here in the US are in Iowa, I think. Then you have the VP for Aldi division. That person's got administration and purchasing, director of store operations. I mentioned to you that Aldi recruited very, very heavily to our School of Business for district manager jobs. Not sure if they're doing that still now. Then director of real estate, then the warehouse. And then you have a separate job over here, corporate purchasing. And so this is the person who's probably working with a private label group, I would think. So in many respects, this structure, I would think, becomes an important source of competitive advantage for Aldi, because they're the ones who are going out and working on all the non-equity strategic alliances to get their stuff made, and then the product is shipped. This person will probably buy the product, but they're also buying the supplies, whatever cleaning supplies and other things that the stores are going to need. So that's the way it works for Aldi. Now you look at a more complicated structure, and a complicated structure. This could be more the reality of how large tech works these days. And so Satya Nadella, of course, is the CEO. So here's the CFO and executive VP. So Chief Development Officer, core strategy, core services, and operations. So they don't have a chief strategy officer. So that person's going to play a kind of a unique role of chief development officer and executive VP, chief marketing officer, chief technology officer, chief learning officer and president, cloud, artificial intelligence, experiences and devices. So I think this is where the Pixel comes into play, and all the other devices that Microsoft has, and except gaming and is carved out there, as is LinkedIn. They did an acquisition of LinkedIn. Here's the HR, you got pure business development. This would probably be, this person right here probably works a lot with this person right here. And they're the ones who are, I would imagine she works a lot with corporations, I would think, coming up with new corporate relationships. And then global sales and worldwide commercial business too. So there's rather complicated. Again, I don't know how updated this is, but what I wanted to do is at least give you a sense of making it real for you in terms of how companies are structured. So the whole idea then is to build a structure, build control systems in place that will help organizations, or increase the likelihood that organizations are going to successfully execute on their strategies.